Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Ruiz, co-founder and CEO of BiasSync. And joining me is Dr. Crystal Miller, our Chief Learning Officer and Organizational Strategist, a very important role here at BiasSync. She leads our content focus, our curriculum focus, amongst other things. And the frequently asked question that we want to address together is, if you are an organization leader and you're wondering about your employees and the experience through BiasSync and whether or not there's going to be some discomfort because the content is so compelling, and then there's also the assessments, and the assessments can be a very significant aha moment for a lot of individuals because it can challenge their perspective on how they show up versus what the assessment shows about how their brain may be defaulting to stereotypical thinking. And so Dr. Miller and I often we talk about this as leaning into the discomfort. And a lot of organization leaders are concerned about discomfort. So Dr. Miller, let's talk about what organization leaders should be thinking about in terms if they have that question in their mind. And then after that, let's also then talk about what makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I want to just offer that anytime that we're talking about learning, we're talking about a little bit of discomfort. So discomfort is actually natural in learning. And when we think about learning, when we think about really evolving and growing, in order to grow, we need to change. And change can be challenging. It is a place where, as human beings, we notice that there are natural patterns of resistance. And so one thing that I would say is that first, in general, learning is going to be presenting some discomfort to certain individuals just based on their own preferences. As humans, we like to have consistency in our own thoughts and our own beliefs and how that aligns with our actions. Now, we try in our assessments and our video modules to do a lot of upfront preparation for our participants to say that this is implicit bias, which means that you may not be aware of it. And often you're not aware of it. And even with those warnings, sometimes people think, these results, I'm not expecting them. And that is what we would say is implicit bias. You're typically not aware of it. And so one of the important strategies that we really offer is even with the work that we do in BiasSync, it's really making sure that organizational leaders lean into that discomfort, normalize it, identify it for participants. And BiasSync can help you in the steps that you need to take to really share that with your employees.
Indeed. As a matter of fact, we have spent a lot of time, and you, Dr. Miller, yourself have been involved in this, in developing communication toolkits for organizational leaders to use both in preparing to launch BiasSync, but also communication toolkits should you get questions. By the way, that's in addition to a lot of the communication and messaging from our experts in the platform itself around, the compelling content, the lessons. And by the way, some of it is very compelling when you see bias in action or you hear people's stories. For some people, it's very impactful. It can actually elicit some strong emotions. Yes. And that's intentional. Not saying that we expect everyone to have the same reaction, but the fact that you're hearing from real people and their experiences, and you're seeing bias in action is an intentional learning strategy, because we know that leads to higher retention. I know, Dr. Miller, we've also talked about, eliciting empathy in terms of how that helps in the learning journey. Maybe you can talk about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. What we know is that just talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is really not enough. And as much as we can share those stories, seeing it, experiencing it, witnessing it is a completely different experience. And when we can make it as real as possible for participants in a way that doesn't necessarily trigger trauma, but actually evokes empathy, then we see that people are more open to really receiving the message, the learning, and ideally opening themselves up to behavior change. And so we really try to strive for content that is going to really pull in the humanity that we all share and evoke empathy, so that we can all be a little more open to the behavior change and the learning that would create more inclusive environments in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about cognitive empathy also as part of the solution to mitigate unconscious bias. So, if you were talking to a leader that says, "Oh, I don't know, I don't know if I want to, elicit uncomfortable emotions or uncomfortable, conversations." By the way, this doesn't happen a lot. The overwhelming majority of the feedback is very positive about the biosync experience. But naturally, right, leaders don't want complexity. They don't want issues. They don't want to, sometimes they just don't want to deal with what's difficult, right? And in this case, they could interpret that this might be uncomfortable. And my question to you is, if you were talking to an organization leader that's perhaps having those thoughts or reactions, what would you say to them about whether or not they should move forward or what the alternative is?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, I would first say you're not alone. But this has been the predominant thinking behavior that we've seen in our culture for a long time. So you're not alone. However, we also can't stay in that position, because that's really propelled the dominant culture to stay exactly where it is and not change. And so I would encourage you to lean into this discomfort, and to help you really make that case in your organization. One of the things that I would offer is that, yes, you're going to notice that there are a handful of individuals, and I really say a handful because we do track the data on how our modules are received, on our engagement, on our satisfaction, all the learning outcomes that we can possibly track. And we know that our content isn't reaching a significant level of discomfort. So it's less than 5% of your population might actually say something, which is a small minority that you don't want to, move away from inclusive work just because there's some discomfort in that population. However, we do pay attention to what that is. And what I can say is that if you don't make this change, if you don't lean into inclusivity, if you don't really pay attention to how unconscious bias and implicit biases are impacting your organization, we know that organizations are going to see high turnover. We're going to see, decreased retention. We're going to see lower employee satisfaction and engagement rates, decreased performance. And in the most serious circumstances, really, human resources and legality issues and suits are prevalent in workplaces that are not taking on this work. And so in a proactive standpoint, I would really encourage you to lean into this work, be proactive, and don't be reactive. Now, with that being said, one of the other points that I really want to draw upon is that when we're talking about these very sensitive issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, sometimes people can get defensive, and that didactic thinking is one of our defensive routines. Like, I'm going to shut down, I'm going to turn away from it, or I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it without the data and the research. I'm just going to throw everything at it. And so I would encourage you, there's many great articles that you can look at that actually give you some insight into why diversity, equity, and inclusion programs fail. And BioSync solution is really set up to give you the data, to give you a point of focus so that you know what you're trying to address in your workplace, and that you know if you're making change in your workplace. Now, with that focus on data, it's important that it's not just one directional, so that these are not just one and dones. Our solution is meant to be a long-time solution. We're really meant to partner with you in that journey. And so I would really encourage you not only to lean into it, but to think carefully about what solutions you're choosing in your inclusion journey, because having a holistic long-term approach that gives you data and is based in science is going to be incredibly important if you see success.
Mm-hmm. And what I would add to what you're saying is I just often just pose the question: do you really want to see behavior change? If you do, then we have addressed some of the really significant challenges. You mentioned the one and done. That really doesn't solve this, the one and done educational experience with one-day training or one-off training, we call them. We know that that doesn't work. That's not enough. It's not that it's bad. It's just not enough. And so what we also see in our feedback is that our leads at our clients, our client organizations, they often tell us that they get such positive feedback from their employees because they thank them for doing something so meaningful. I mean, we really elicit the opportunity for some really meaningful conversations, and they see that as a huge positive in their organization. So if you want to see change, then it's a good opportunity to look at something different. If you want to avoid discomfort and that's what you're prioritizing, then obviously there's other solutions out there, and we know based on the research that many of them don't work in terms of their approach. So thank you, Dr. Miller, for addressing this very important question.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to say, if you're concerned about this discomfort, I encourage you to lean into it and know that BioSync is going to take that step with you, and we have the support and the resources to help you along in that journey.
Absolutely. Dr. Miller is not our only PhD. We have a huge roster of PhDs that we bring into this work to support you. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.